Hi everyone, I'm Shelley and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another Question the Narrative video, and today's topic is the people of Day 6. This is actually a topic that I covered a few years ago, but I've come across some other material that I thought that I would share with you on the topic. And if you aren't sure what I'm talking about, it's that Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 seem to have two separate creation accounts. Now, some people believe that Genesis 2 is simply a retelling of Genesis 1, while other people believe that they're two separate events. And the people who believe that they are two separate events also believe that the people who were created on day 6 were not, in fact, Adam and Eve. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. And to start that off, though, let's just read both of the accounts, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. Now, this isn't something that I have made a decision about at all, and I don't know that I really have to make a decision about it. I'm on the fence. I find it interesting to think about it one way or the other, so I'd be interested in hearing what your opinion is on the matter. I'm sure, again, that I'll get people on both sides, and that's okay. Again, this isn't a salvation issue. It's just something that I find interesting to think about. And if it gets us looking at our Bible and reading our Bible, then I would say that that is a good thing. So, like I mentioned, I will be reading Genesis 1 and at least I think I'll be reading Genesis 2 in its entirety also. So if you do not want to listen to Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, it's not going to take that long, but you can fast forward and I will be sharing a chart comparing the two, showing how there are some differences between them. But otherwise, I'm just going to get started on reading Genesis 1 right now. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. And there was evening and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, "Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens." So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kinds." And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." And God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Now let's go to Genesis 2. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created, in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. When no bush of the field was yet in the land, and no small plant of the field had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain on the land, and there was no man to work the ground, and a mist was going up from the land, and was watering the whole face of the ground. Then the Lord God formed the man of dust from the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature. And the Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east, and there he put the man whom he had formed. And out of the ground the Lord God made to spring up every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. A river flowed out of Eden to water the garden, and there it divided and became 4 rivers. The name of the first is the Pishon. It is the one that flowed around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. And the gold of that land is good. Bdellium and onyx stone are there. The name of the second river is the Gihon. It is the one that flowed around the whole land of Cush. And the name of the third river is the Tigris, which flows east of Assyria. And the fourth river is the Euphrates. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, "You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die." Then the Lord God said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him." Now out of the ground the Lord God had formed every beast of the field and every bird of the heavens, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. The man gave names to all livestock, and to the birds of the heavens, and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a helper fit for him. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and while he slept took one of his ribs, and closed up its place with flesh. And the rib that the Lord God had taken from the man he made into a woman, and brought her to the man. Then the man said, "This at last is bone of my bones, and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother, and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked, and were not ashamed." Okay, so hopefully you were able to discern some differences in chapter 1 and chapter 2, and this is why there is some debate about this. So first of all, let's just read what it says about the duration of creation. And so Genesis 1 says, 1:1 to 2:3. But for time's sake, I'm just going to say Genesis 1, for this first part of the chart, and then Genesis 2 for the second. So Genesis 1 says 6 days. Genesis 2 says 1 day is implied, and it's the word biyom. The primordial scenario. In Genesis 1, it's dark, watery chaos. And in Genesis 2, it's a desert-like oasis. The sequence of creation is also different. So in Genesis 1, there is light. Then there is the sky dome, which is solid. There is dry land. There are plants. Then lights were set in the sky dome. Sea and sky creatures. Then land animals. Then humans. Now in Genesis 2, first it was man. Then the garden with trees and a river. Land animals and birds. And then there was the woman. So right in here, you see that the humans, male and female, he created them, were created after all of these things. But in Genesis 2, it seems that the man was made first. He was placed in the garden, then these things were made, and then after that, then woman was made. So the method of creation for Genesis 1, God speaks, separates, names, and blesses. Genesis 2, Yahweh God forms, breathes, plants, puts to sleep, and builds. Portrait of God, transcendent, sovereign over creation, some anthropomorphism. And in Genesis 2, immanent, actively involved in creation, lots of anthropomorphism. Now the portrait of humanity. This is really interesting. Unspecified number of males and females created simultaneously. Royals created in divine image, given dominion over the earth. In Genesis 2, it's one Adam from the Adama, then one woman, Esau, from the man, in 2 separate acts. And they were servants. They were made caretakers of a garden. So one very important thing, well, it's important to me, interesting, I should say, maybe it's not important, maybe it's just interesting to me, that Gary Wayne points out in, I believe I actually saw it in a talk that he had with David Carrico, but he pointed out how the people of day 6 in that creation account, they were made to be hunter-gatherers, while Adam and Eve, when they were placed in the garden, Adam was placed there to take care of the garden. So he had a more agrarian society. So there was a difference also in those two ways of living as well. Now, while we Christians will always think of Adam and Eve as being the first man and woman created, as most people know, that is not the same throughout what other cultures believe. And I found a group of people called the Blackheaded people, or sometimes called the Blackheads. And I don't really like calling them that because it just makes me think of pimples. So don't want to get that confused because, yeah, when I Googled Blackheads, that's all that came up. So that was tough. But anyway, I would just want to read to you what it says in the Genesis 6 conspiracy about this. According to Sumerian traditions derived from the Assyrian tablets, the first humans were known as the Blackheads. Although most of the antediluvian clay tablets have been lost to history, many survived to the time of Ashurbanipal, circa 668 to 633 BC. Ashurbanipal noted that he possessed antediluvian tablets in his library, boasting that he was learned in the translation of those precious ancient Sumerian texts. He is the first known king to collect clay tablets into a large library at Nineveh, collecting 30,000 tablets, including the Epic of Gilgamesh. What was most intriguing about the Blackheads was that they were the antediluvian Sumerians, according to Alford. Cahill notes that, in fact, the Sumerians actually called themselves the Black-headed people. One wonders whether the blackhead was both a specifically descriptive and analogous appellation in contrast to the blonde and red-headed Nephilim. Now, I'm going to interject here. I don't think that it was necessarily in comparison or contrast to the blonde and red-headed Nephilim. I'm wondering if it is perhaps because if these were indeed at least one group of the people of day 6, if they in fact looked different from the posterity of Adam and Eve, who may have had the lighter hair than they. So not necessarily Nephilim related. It could have also been that they were just using the term black-headed people to differentiate themselves from any other group of people. But I just wanted to point that out. I don't think it was necessarily to differentiate them from the Nephilim, although it could have been, Blackheads recorded in their legends that all tools, weapons, and marvelous inventions were provided to them by the gods. Evidently, even the Sumerian language is completely distinct and unrelated to any of the language families of the world. I'm going to interject here that I've actually seen information to the contrary of that said that it is not as distinct as people believe. So I'm just going to skip through that part. And I'm just going to say Sumerian tablets clearly state that Sumerians received all of their knowledge of historical events before civilized man was created, directly from the heavenly Anunnaki gods. This declaration clearly suggests a heretofore biblically unaccounted for period of uncivilized nomadic blackheads and a specific turning point of history towards civilization. So this is where I want to go back to the point that Gary Wayne made about the day 6 people being hunter-gatherers, while Adam and Eve were a more agrarian society, because that is where the civilization comes in, is when a society goes from hunter-gatherers to agrarian society. So again, this is another clue that they may, if the day 6 people exist, that these blackheads may indeed have been a part of them, because they themselves consider themselves to be uncivilized in comparison to the civilization that came after them. Now I'm going to continue reading. Again, one further wonders whether the blackheads were in fact part of the race of people created in day 6, and that is exactly what I just said. So I'm just going to skip down, and I'm just going to read to you that it says blackheads were created in plural, male and female at the same time, with a mandate to multiply in great numbers. So if we go back to Genesis 1, and it says here, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. So again, we have multiple people being created, and they are being told to be fruitful and multiply. Another interesting trail that Gary Wayne is formulating the crumbs to, so to speak, is that Cain, in fact, married into one of these day 6 tribes. And it could have been one of the black-headed people in one of those tribes. But, and there are some who will say, well, Cain just married his sister. And yet there will be others who will say, no, he must have married someone from one of these other tribes. Again, this isn't something that I have made a decision on. I just think that it's interesting. But if you follow that line of thinking, Cain would have married into these day 6 people, and Cain, coming from that agrarian society that his parents had been living in the garden, he would have been able to then give many of these skills to the day 6 people and to have helped them to develop their society. I highly recommend that if you are interested in this topic, that you get the Genesis 6 conspiracy by Gary Wayne, because he goes so deeply into this, and I certainly don't have time to get into all of it. But just suffice it to say that Cain was an evil man, and according to Gary Wayne, it is likely that he was guided by some dark angels, possibly the Watchers. and he did some nefarious things. And so his progeny, his descendants, they picked up a lot of bad things from him. Okay. And again, it is believed that he married into these day 6 people. Again, from Genesis 6 Conspiracy, it says, in the Ethiopian work, the Kebra Nagast, the daughters of Cain, was substituted for the phrase daughters of men that was employed in the Bible. In fact, the derisive daughters of Cain, according to Andrew Collins, were believed to have been easily led into unbridled debauchery that led to the unholy unions with sons of God. Now, these unexplained Cainite-led daughters of men, who curiously increased in great numbers on the earth, seem to refer back to the nomadic other race of humans created on day 6 that Cain married into, those who were blessed obscurely to be fruitful and multiply on the earth. These unexplained humans were not the domesticated agrarian Sethites. And I just want to drive that fact home with one more passage that I'm going to read. It's very short, from the same book. And it says, the first creation, day 6, produced intelligent beings designed to reproduce rapidly, nomads, hunterers, and gatherers. They proliferated beyond all expectations and later were drafted by the, quote, gods to toil as a massive workforce in exchange for consistent rations of food. And that is bringing in some of the Anunnaki tradition. So I think that was just Gary Wayne summarizing what they are saying. But you can notice the difference. So if we do have these watchers being an influence on these day 6 people, then between what Cain was able to teach them on top of what they got from the watchers, then yes, then they would have all of a sudden a huge explosion of technology from going from a very uncivilized group of people to very, very civilized. So again, it is Gary Wayne's assertion that Cain married in to this group of day 6 people, and between Cain and their involvement with the Watchers or some similar Elohim, evil Elohim we'll call them, they were able to advance to a more technical society, a more advanced society. And indeed, these are some of the civilizations that we encounter later in the Bible that don't really seem to have an explanation for where they come from. His assertion is that this is where those other races come from that are talked about in the Bible that, again, don't seem to have a root, is that they are actually from these day 6 people. So then you're probably thinking, okay, but what about the flood? That completely wiped everyone out except for Noah and his family. Well, I found an interesting article about that. And the article is called Why a Local Flood. Now, just hear me out on this. And again, this isn't something that I'm still on the fence about this one too. Okay. But I do think that this is very interesting if you think about the reason behind this. For many people, the notion that the Bible teaches a global flood is as axiomatic as the notion that it affirms the existence of God, that the deluge of Noah covered the entire planet. Yes, I know, obviously written by someone who believes the earth is a globe. Okay. Chew the meat, spit out the bones. As some sincere and godly friends put it to me, the obvious meaning of the text, so that any other interpretation is circumventing what Moses really meant. I can sympathize with how people view it this way. After all, if you start reading through Genesis 6 to 8, you stumble upon verses like these. I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall die. Genesis 6:17. Take with you 7 pairs of all clean and unclean animals and birds to keep their offspring alive on the face of all the earth. Genesis 7:2-3. And the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. Genesis 7:19. All flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. Genesis 7:21. All flesh, all the earth, all the mountains under heaven. Sounds pretty clear, right? But sometimes what seems initially obvious can actually become more and more implausible upon closer inspection. I believe that is the case with the notion of a global flood. In fact, here I want to suggest that both 1, the language of the biblical account, and 2, the difficulties involved positing a global flood actually favor the idea that Noah's flood was local, though bear in mind that local does not mean small. My interest here is not so much to convert people to a local flood view as much as to create some space for both views as interpretive options within the church, and to try to soften and nuance our rhetoric in our dialogue with those outside the church. Even more important than getting it right, in my opinion, is that we deal with the issue in a way that does not detract from our unity and mission. What does all the earth mean? We read the Bible in an English translation and with a modern understanding of Earth as a round globe orbiting the sun. Well, I don't view it that way, but anyway. So it is only understandable for a modern reader to interpret all the Earth as all of, quote, planet Earth. The Hebrew word eretz, however, often means land, ground, or country. And when paired with kol, all, every, it almost always refers to a local territory through the Old Testament. Sometimes you know that because of a qualifier, as in verses like Genesis 2:11. The name of the first is Pishon. It flows around the whole coal land, Eretz of Havilah, where there is gold. But even without a qualifier, this is the usual meaning. Rich Deem lists 56 examples of kol Eretz having a local referent in the Hebrew Bible. I here list the first 10 in canonical order. Check out footnote 5 of his article for the other 46. So here we've got 10. I'm not going to read every single one. I'll just pick a few for you though. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If to the left, then I will go to the right, or if to the right, then I will go to the left. The whole land was only the land of Canaan. You shall then sound a ram's horn abroad on the 10th day of the 7th month. On the day of atonement, you shall sound a horn all through your land. Leviticus 25:9. The Hebrews were not required to sound a horn throughout the entire earth. And Jonathan smote the garrison of the Philistines that was in Geba, and the Philistines heard of it. Then Saul blew the trumpet throughout the land, saying, Let the Hebrews hear. 1 Samuel 13:3. Obviously, Saul could not have blown a trumpet loud enough to be heard throughout the entire country. And all the earth was seeking the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom which God had put in his heart. 1 Kings 10:4. It is unlikely that the Native Americans went to see Solomon. If you read through Genesis 6-8 and substitute the word land or territory for earth, already the feel of the whole story changes. Everything that is in the land shall die gives a much different impression to the English-speaking reader than everything that is on the earth shall die. But the former is the more consistent rendering of the Hebrew throughout the Old Testament. And the same thing can be said about other language in Genesis 6-8, however comprehensive it seems in translation. It is frequently used elsewhere in the Bible to refer to local phenomena. For instance, the phrase under the whole heaven in Deuteronomy 2:25 and elsewhere throughout Deuteronomy. We won't belabor the point, but we should also note in passing that Genesis 7:20 should be rendered the water rose 20 feet and all the hills, mountains were covered, rather than the water rose to 20 feet higher than the hills and mountains. When you think about it, it makes sense that a writer in the ancient Near East would refer to all of their own region with more comprehensive language, all the earth, land, territory, especially if all of humanity was limited to that region prior to the scattering of Babel, and if that is all the author knew about. The biblical authors used the idiom and language of their day. They probably didn't know about the South Pole. Neither do I. And we shouldn't expect them to have used language as if they did. So I will leave a link in the description for all of these articles that I'm sharing with you today, in case you wanted to read the rest of it. But that really does get the point across that is it possible that some of these other races may have indeed, survived the flood. And again, I just said in another video the other week, it's very possible that the same story was passed down because of the Tower of Babel. Everyone had the same collective memory of the flood, and that's why there are all of these stories. But the same could also be said that the reason that there are many similar stories, but not some of them not really that similar, is because it was more localized, and that more people survived than just because we need to remember that the Bible is primarily, at least the book of Genesis is primarily a book about the line of Seth. So I think that's important too. So if there would be another line, then it would make sense that their side of the story wasn't being told. Again, I'm playing devil's advocate here because I'm just trying to look at both sides. So getting back to the Blackheads now and their identity as the Sumerians, let's learn a little bit about the Tower of Babel. The Sumerian Kings List says when the kingship was lowered from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. And it tells us that the Tower of Babel was also known as the Ziggurat of Eridu. So I'm actually just going to share a little bit from the book Nimrod, Tower of Babel by Trey Smith. And I always leave links in the description also for the books that I'm reading from in case you wanted to check them out. But it tells us Eridu was founded by the first king of the earth, Enmerkar, and grew around a massive temple. The homes were made of mud brick and built on top of one another and rose upwards and outwards. The temple grew upward the larger the city became. Eridu is called the oldest city in the world. The Ziggurat Tower at the highest point, the heart of Eridu, Tower of Babel, was the largest in the world. Even the Sumerians claimed the gods destroyed their tower to the heavens. So, is it possible that these Blackhead people were also in the plains of Shinar? And this is just a picture of the plains of Shinar. Just Googled it. So, consequently, I found this article. And this one, it mentions Eridu, which is, again, thought to be the location of the Tower of Babel. So Cain's city, we read in Genesis 4:17 that Cain knew his wife and she conceived and bare Enoch, and he builded a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. Which city was that, and what's the background in history? Adam, the man in the garden, took on the name of men and represented men in the scenario we see in the Garden of Eden. That's what we read about in the 2nd chapter of Genesis. However, the local Sumerian people seem to have had their own records of what happened in those days. The Sumerian language has no modern equivalent language, unlike Akkadian. And again, this is something that I'm just going to say. Now, this could be correct, but from something else that I read, it said that this is actually not the case. But I'll just read it anyway. So we may not always see an immediate connection in the Sumerian words or names they used. The Bible teaches us that Cain built a city. The name of the city was Enoch, named after Cain's son. The city of Eridu was another southern Mesopotamian city and appears to be the city in which Adam and Eve lived after their employment in the Garden of Eden had been terminated. The Sumerian king list describes Eridu as the first city in the southern Mesopotamian area that had a king. God breathed into Adam in 5148 BC. Eridu was already a small community by the time Adam took his place within it, and as a result of his long years, he was soon recognized as a leader of men, as were his offspring. The city of Uruk started sometime before 4000 BC. Uruk is a strong contender for the city that Cain built. The city of Uruk was the largest city in the world at its height. 40,000 residents with about 80,000 people living in the surrounding areas. Be fruitful and multiply, City-states were a feature of southern Mesopotamia, hence the need felt by Moses to mention Cain's city. Some people point out that there may be some linguistic similarities to names in Genesis. So just scroll down here. There is no biblical record of the birth of Cain, so we can't reliably date it, but his younger brother Seth was born in 4918 BC. The majority of Adam's antediluvian male offspring fathered children before they reached the age of 200, including 4 of them who were in their 160s when they first became fathers. I'm going to just hold on. Okay, just trying to keep it relevant to what I'm talking about today. But anyway, God helped Adam and Eve replace Abel with Seth, not too long after Adam's death. Eve said, "God has granted me another child in place of Abel since Cain killed him," in Genesis 4:25. God was keen to see the line to Christ continue. Adam and his male successors in the 9 generations before Noah fathered their firstborn male at ages between approximately 160 and 200. The earliest community settlements found in Uruk are what archaeologists call Uruk the 18th, dating back to around 5000 BC. But these early settlements were not a city and are still considered as part of the Ubaid period. Cain, it seems, made his way to these settlements for reasons of daily food, shelter, and finding a wife. Let us say that Cain could father children around the age of 180, taking us to the year 4808 BC when Cain's son Enoch was born. So this settlement, if you go according to these dates, was already, it already had a large population. Okay, so the question above mentions that Cain had relations with his wife, and she conceived and gave birth to Enoch, and he built a city and called the name of the city Enoch after the name of his son. Building a city takes time, and Cain had the time for above that of regular human beings. So, according to this, here is another link between Cain and the Sumerians. Okay, and again, if they would have been the day 6 people, the Blackheads, and the idea that Cain married into these people, and here we have a connection with Cain and the Sumerians. So then, speaking of the time at the Tower of Babel, in Deuteronomy 32, we're going to start with verse 7. It says, "Remember the days of old, consider the years long past. Ask your father, and he will tell you, your elders, and they will inform you. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided the sons of man, he set the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted inheritance." Now I know that the common view of that is that the nations were actually the 70 nations listed in the table of nations in Genesis 10. However, there are people who believe that according to the sons of God is actually referring to the Elohim, and not, now some Bible translations will tell you the sons of Israel, but Israel did not exist yet in Deuteronomy 32:8, so that wouldn't be consistent. And so what they're saying is the allotment that they're talking about, they're talking about dividing them among the Elohim, okay, the divine sons of God, or what some people might call the lowercase g gods. So one thing that I was thinking was, if it's possible that, God took his portion, he took Israel, and then there were all of the other nations that were just basically handed over to other gods. And is it possible that many of those nations had a large element of the day 6 people in them, that they were not from the line of Seth, and and again, the Bible is that story, but there is, a reconciliation, so to speak. And I wanted to share one more article with you. Let me see if I can find it. And this is by Bob Cruikshank, the Burrows of Berea blog. And this is called Romans 11:25-27, Part 2, Spain, the Fullness of the Gentiles, and the Mission of Paul. And I'm just going to read this section here, because if you think about, the Gentiles were grafted in to become rightful sons of God in the New Testament. So, a lot of times people will have an issue and say, well, if the day 6 people existed, then how could they possibly be saved if they were not from the line of Seth? And I'm thinking that it could be the same situation. It could be a grafted in situation. And so if we're thinking about the Deuteronomy 32:8 and the allotment to the lowercase g sons of God, and if it's possible that many of those nations contained the day 6 people, well, then we can read this here. To understand Romans 9:11, we have to bear in mind some background matters that are often overlooked by expositors concerning the origin and purpose of Israel. God called Abraham to be a priest to the nations right after the incident at the Tower of Babel. These two events are intimately related. After the call of Abraham, there were 2 distinct kinds of believers in the world, Hebrew and Gentile. But this was not God's original purpose. The bifurcation of humanity had a special and limited purpose, to manifest God's covenant until the coming of the Messiah and the restoration of the world. By the time Paul wrote Romans, the Messiah had indeed come, the apostles were manifesting God's covenant, and the restoration of the world had begun. Early on in the epistle, Paul agrees to the promise of Abraham and his descendants to be heir of the world. Like those who went before him, Paul is endeavoring to make good on his promise. The calling of Israel all along was to minister God's promise to the Gentiles. That is what Abraham was called to do, and we see him doing it. Joseph did it. Moses married an Ethiopian. Samson offered marriage to a Philistine. David converted the Philistine city of Gath. Elijah went to a Gentile widow. Elisha cured a Gentile soldier of leprosy. Thus it is no surprise that when Jesus appears on the scene as the true Israelite, he ministers to the Gentiles and sends the gospel to the Gentiles. And remember, again, the Gentiles, when it comes to the Jews of that time, there were 2 kinds of people, Jews and not Jews. And anyone who were not Jews were referred to as Gentiles. So I'm just going to close up this video with this final excerpt from this blog post. It says, as a descendant of Abraham and a chosen apostle of the true Israel, Jesus Christ, Paul is fulfilling his destiny and reversing Babel. His trip to Spain will complete the mission. So think of it this way. He is reversing Babel. He is reversing the time that all of those nations were divided and that only one portion was under Yahweh and everything else was under these lowercase g gods. He was reversing it. Michael Heiser puts it all together. Why is Spain of any concern to us, and why did Paul want so badly to go there? In Paul's day, Spain was where Tarshish was. Tarshish was a Phoenician colony in what was later Spain. The point is profound. Paul was convinced that his life's mission as apostle to the Gentiles, the disinherited nations, would only be finished when he got to Spain. As incredible as it sounds, Paul was conscious that his mission for Jesus actually involved spreading the gospel to the westernmost part of the known world, Tarshish, so that the disinheritance at Babel would be reversed. So I think that's an amazing connection that was made here. So again, this article will also be in the description, but this is just kind of my thoughts on this whole topic. Sometimes they're kind of coming in from everywhere, but this is just how my mind works. So if you're still here, I'm glad that you were able to bear with me for a little while. Anyway, that's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one down below. And if you like my work and would like to support my page, I will leave a link in the description for my channel membership, or you can just click on it right on my channel page. And I hope you have a great day.